Right.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, everyone. You're just gonna. It was just advertised as they're just gonna eavesdrop on our conversation. So how have you been?
I've been good. How are the kids?
Kids are good. We should start with the kids, I have to say. So, I know there's been a lot of. There have been people who have had their issues with the Facebook. But I have to say, I remain quite a fan of that. And one of the reasons I remain a fan of the Facebook is because I get to see what your children are up to, and they seem insane.
My kids are insane.
I'm not sure, or you're insane. I'm one or the other.
I think it's probably a little combination of all of the above. Yes.
Oh.
I think my last post was we got like these huge packages at our house, and so there are boxes and paper and like bubble wrap everywhere. And it was recycling day. And my husband was really eager to take it out to recycling. And so just to mess with him, I just let the kids go to town. And he's like waiting to recycle. And the kids are like, we're making our own world right now.
That's right.
And I'm like, yeah, hun, they're making their own world.
So basically, you're messing with your husband by empowering your children to think about the future.
To be totally creative.
It's genius. Yeah, the post said, had a picture of this mess, and it said, my children are creating something, ... a mess. That's what, which is exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, and I like to keep track of David and his kids because his kids are like ultra genius, creative,
exactly.
Like amazing people. Like one of his sons is actually incredibly musical, and like in his little pinky has more musical genius than most other people. Well,
we'll find out because he just graduated from college and thinks that's how he's making a living,
he is.
which is not clear to me. I have to say, I think it's probably a better bet for him than venture capital, but it isn't.
True.
It's not entirely clear. So I have 4 kids, and my oldest is an aspiring composer. My next kid is an art practice major, and my 4th kid is a photographer. So this venture thing better work.
Yeah, they need to be trust fund kids. Whereas
right.
I'm an Asian
trust
mom,
fund baby.
so
You can trust me.
I'm like, I need a doctor, I need a lawyer, and an accountant, and that's why I have 3 kids.
Please. We're Jews and we're failing. I was an attorney. My mom's like, I got an attorney. That's nice. I hope one of your children will be a doctor. And it was like, that totally didn't work.
Yeah.
And I can't get any of my children to care one iota about technology.
Yeah, I think the funny thing for me is I have this young, my 6-year-old son once saw this article, and it said somewhere it was like the most powerful woman in startups, Miura-Ko. And he looked at it and he's like, you know what that makes me, Mama? And I said, what does that make you? He's like, the most powerful 6-year-old in startups. And I was like, it's not transitive. No, you don't get that.
It 100% is. You should have said, truthfully, and I learned this from my mother. My mother was a force of nature. And my mother, when she knew things, she would tell you them with great certainty. And when she didn't know, she'd make them up with great certainty, which was amazing.
That's my 6-year-old.
And if you said something like that, she would say, why, yes. I'd say, Mom, do you think I'm going to be like the greatest violinist ever on the planet? Why, yes. Yes, you are. Like, okay, I'll get back at it. Meanwhile, I suck, and it's like, well, facts are irrelevant to you succeeding.
It's true.
But I do think, so our kids, so this isn't, did you people want to hear about technology or venture capital? Because frankly, we have other things to talk about, and you're just listening, so it doesn't really matter. No, one of the things that's interesting to me about, right, you have kids, you have a daughter.
Yes.
And she has sat around and watched you be a venture capitalist. And I will say that I think one of the things, as I watch my kids grow up, and I remember this moment, I was on vacation, but I was negotiating these deals. I was sitting with one of my little kids, and he was sitting next to me, and I'm on the phone, blah, blah, blah. Well, if we raise 25, then we'll blah, blah. And then we finish that call, then I do another one. Oh, if we, probably 15 is the right number. And we finished the call, and my then, 8-year-old said, Daddy, were you just talking about $40 million? And I said, what? And he said, that first call was about $25 million, and that second call was about $15 million. That's $40 million. And I said, yeah, that's true. He's like, that's a lot of money. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's interesting. And they're listening, right? And so, one of the things is that you have this daughter who's watched her mom be, and it is a perfectly accurate description to call you, if not the most powerful woman in venture, one of the most powerful women in venture. She's watched her mother be this powerful venture capitalist, and whatever that. She also has watched her mother yell at her and tell her to do her fucking homework. But in the meantime, she's also watched you, doing deals and working with companies and talking about, in your instance, with a company like Lyft, billions of dollars and all that, right? Do you think that has had an impact? Will have an impact? Does that translate?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. A couple of things. So I had my daughter, my first child, Abby, when I was in the middle of my PhD program at Stanford. And I figured it was the perfect moment. I just passed my quals, and then I was going to have this child. And then I didn't realize, when she was 18 months, I started Floodgate. And so then I'm starting a venture capital firm, I'm finishing my PhD, and then a few months later, I'm pregnant with my second child. And so she's lived through
me too.
She's lived through this crazy, I have this picture of her wearing my graduation cap from my graduation cap from my PhD, along with they hood you, so my hood. And to me, that was it was as much hers as it was mine. I would take her to everything that I needed to do. So I had to teach a class once, and my husband was out of town. My parents weren't around. And so I took her to the final presentations that these students of mine were doing. And I remember losing track of her, and she's crawling at this time. And I'm taking notes and trying to grade these presentations. And then all of a sudden I see her appear at the front of the room, and she's able to crawl and stand. So she stands in front of the audience, and she's just she literally did this, and I was oh crap. But I remember there was a moment where recently where I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and she's an executive, and she talked about how she saw me doing all these things. She saw me taking my kid to lectures when I had to do lectures, and she saw me actually one time I had to take one of my kids to South by Southwest with me. And I'm carting him around in his little infant car seat. And it never really occurred to me what that meant to other people. It was just sort of, I had to do what I had to do to get by. And she talked about seeing that. And when she had to go to South by Southwest the next year, she had a little baby, and she was thinking, what am I going to do? And she hearkened back to seeing me carrying around my little Anton, running around doing meetings and dealing with it. And she was like, oh, well, I've seen that before, so I can do that. And I think it's the same thing for my daughter, is I just want her to see all of this and think that it's normal, right? I want her to think it's normal that I'm not home every single night because I have business dinners, or that I want her to think it's normal for a woman to be in a boardroom where there's only dudes. I want her to think that it's normal that that I can do those things, and it's not a huge challenge, because there's going to be times when she's the only woman in the room, and there's going to be times when she has to speak up for herself. And also even our family dynamics. My husband's a very busy executive, and he does all the dishes, and my kids think that's totally normal. we were singing, and like these kids were learning this church song like about mothers for Mother's Day. This other day at church, and my 6-year-old, the one who was saying he's the most powerful 6-year-old in startups, he walks up to me. He's like, it's funny, we're singing the song about mommies and how they make dinner all the time, but really, like, it's grandma who makes dinner all the time. So I'm wondering if I should sing the song to grandma and not to you. And I was like, you little squirt.
My children would say, really, it's Amber India that makes dinner all the time.
DoorDash.
It's not any of you people.
It's magical. But like, I think that's fine. Like, I like the notion, like they don't have this solid idea of like what a woman does inside the house. They think of it as a lot of different roles, and that everyone pitches in. And so to me, it's not just my daughter, but like my sons need to know that too. And it's, and like, I look at your life too, and you have, your wife is such an extraordinary like advocate for artists and so involved in that. You see that trickle down into your kids really like vividly, right? And so the influence of the mom and the dad are so important in some of those circumstances.
But I do think it's interesting, right? There is this temptation in business to pretend like, oh, I have business and then there's family. Yeah. And I'm a serious business person, therefore I will pretend to not have, not to care about family.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is so pernicious and stupid and also like inhumane, right? There was when I was in law school, there was this great, completely appropriate cartoon in the law school newspaper. We were all out interviewing for law firm jobs, and the cartoon was a young woman, interviewing for a law firm job, and then you hear this, "Here, catch," and you see this baby fly through the air, and then it bounces off her chest and falls to the ground, and then the hiring partner, a man, says, "You're hired." Right? Which is actually pretty funny because it's like, that's what they were looking for. Meanwhile, I'm working at this big firm in Manhattan where they're like, we're supposed to work 100-hour weeks. Unfortunately, we did work 100-hour weeks. And at night, I would go home. I would take big boxes of stuff home, and they'd like, "Where are you going?" And I'd say, "I'm going home. Call me." Like, how hard is it for you to call me? And they're like, "That's not what we do." And I was like, "Well, I don't fucking care what you do. I have 2 small children at home. I'm going home. Call me if you need me." And it was just, and actually my very lowest moment in the venture business was after my 4th child was born. My wife took the position that she needed sleep and I did not need sleep, and therefore I got to do all nighttime feedings, which was like a totally reasonable idea. And in fact, I didn't really need a whole lot of sleep, but apparently more than I was getting, because I was being pitched by this team of entrepreneurs, and apparently I fell asleep. So imagine like 4 people on one side of the table and me on the other side of the table. And imagine now you're pitching me and this is what you get. Now, I still to this day do not know how they awoke me. I imagine they're, like bang the table. Apparently, finally I woke up because I didn't even know this had happened. I said, "That was a great meeting, thank you." They went off, and then they made some more progress, and they email my partner, and they say, "Hey, Dave Marquardt." By the way, Dave Marquardt, who's the founder of my firm, this like Titan, first and only investor in Microsoft, blah, 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 and very traditional gentleman, with all that comes with that, was sent this email like, "We'd love to give you an update." He's like, "Well, talk to David. He heard the story the first time." And they're like, "We would love to tell David, only he fell asleep in our last pitch." And then I had to give this whole like, "I'm so sorry. I just had I had 4 kids under the age of 7, and one was a newborn. I was doing nighttime feedings." And of course, most of them were like, "Yeah, but you're still an idiot, Yeah. But my feeling was like, yes, I'm an idiot, but I'm an idiot who actually gives a shit about his family.
Yeah.
That's got to count for something.
I think it totally, I had once a guy tell me that he was balancing home and life because he would work until like, as late as he would just to get all the work done. And then when he got home, he could be super present. But then I asked him, like, "Well, what time do you get home?" He's like, 8 or 9 p.m. And I was like, well, that's messed up because, like, I can't get home all the time at 8 or 9 p.m. because I don't have a nanny who's going to stay until 8 or 9 p.m. every day. And then if I do that, I'll never see my kids, right? And so sometimes, when you look for a male advocate, like what you want is what you're doing, which is I'm going to go home at 6. Because then all the other ladies in the house and all the other men who are dads can actually go home at 6. And then guess what? We get back online at 9 if that's what we really need to do. But actually being visible in that, okay, I'm going to have a moment where I'm going to go home and like do that. It was really important. In fact, when I was starting up Floodgate, there was this moment where my partner needed to start doing pickup and drop-offs of his kids. And so he suddenly had this momentous realization. He's like, oh, you know what, Anne? I can't get into the office until 8:30, maybe 9. And I was like, really? Like, as if I didn't know that, And it was great because now I felt like someone understood that. And I see this even in executives. Like my husband was telling me that another executive of his company was trying to do town hall meetings at 8 a.m. And my husband had to explain to this other executive, you can't do that because like there's a lot of parents who won't be able to get there in time. And so you want to have that kind of diversity, not just the diversity that you can actually see, that's important too, but like the diversity in terms of what's going on at home. Like maybe you have to take care of your parents. Maybe you're single, maybe you're a single parent. Maybe you're married. There's like lots of different styles of life that you have. And the more you have that represented within a small group or a large group, the better off everyone is because you don't have like that first person coming in to have to explain, I'm doing night duty for the baby.
So your partnership is actually majority women at this point, right? But not the total staff, the investing and
poor Mike,
right? So obviously that was driven by intentionality. It takes intentionality, et cetera. How did you guys think about that as you were doing it? And was there a philosophy like, oh, this is going to impact us in a particular positive way?
Yeah.
Or was it, look, this is just a better idea for us and we'll see how it works? What was your process?
I think, so for us, it was kind of a magical process because when Mike and I got started, we were just naturally 50-50. And so as a result of that, we just got a lot of female candidates for any role that we were looking for. And it was really funny. At one point, I think we had 6 women and Mike. And Mike looked around the room and he's like, Anne, the next hire, he's like, I know I shouldn't say this, but if we're not careful, we're about to tip the scales. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We've already tipped the scales. And I kept on looking at these resumes and I was saying, he's like, I just want to talk football with some people. And I was like, that's great. I have this female athlete. She's amazing. She loves football. And he's like, Anne, come on. And it was really interesting to me because we actually had some intentionality about it, but it really wasn't. I was really looking for great candidates. And lo and behold, there were like a lot of really great female candidates. And they were a great culture fit because we had sort of this very like wide angle view on what a culture fit would be for our firm. And so that piece to us was really easy. It was actually going the reverse of like then finding more dudes to enter into our firm then became like, oh, we should actually, it was a weird thing to actually talk about, but our firm, we were not setting out to create a female-based firm. And so we were like, we need to be more intentional about finding, are there other guys that we might want to work with? Unfortunately, we found a couple, but it was what I loved was we got a great set of resumes. We continue to. What I would say to women, though, like to me, that was a little bit eye-opening because I said, ladies, you need to be applying just as much to the men-only firm as well as the female partnerships where you see other women like you. Because, especially today with, I'm part of this group called All Raise, where we are really strategically trying to increase not only the number of women who are empowered to fund future startups, we're trying to also do the same for founders. And because of this movement, I'm painfully aware of the fact that there are lots of very enlightened partnerships that want to make a change. And they're looking for very qualified candidates, and they want that pipeline of women. They are not looking for a female partner, but they are looking for that pipeline. And if women don't raise their hands, then they aren't able to find you, right? You have to raise your hand to be able to be found. And so, the more I talk to these male partnerships, I know that there are lots of people out there that would welcome female partners with open arms. And so that's what I'm trying to encourage lots of women to raise their hands. Let's talk about it. If you're interested in it, we want to know.
I mean, it is interesting. So I run this conference, and comes to this conference. It's called The Lobby. It's like all the interesting conversations in a conference happen in the lobby. So why are you here listening to us? Go to the lobby and have an interesting conversation. But except here when this is awesome.
This is awesome.
But after this is done, get the fuck out of here. Go talk to people out there. I'm sorry. Don't do that. But anyway, that's the lobby, and it's this gathering. And when I started the lobby, and this is a great example of like this, when you are not intentional, when you don't show any intentionality about this question, you will get a predictable outcome, which is I gathered together a group of very thoughtful friends of mine to discuss who would we invite, who would the first 150 people we invite to this be. And that group, although I can't recall precisely who was in it, I'm pretty sure was just white men. Right, I'm pretty sure, and again, not intentional, whatever. And then we invited the first 150 people, and I recently went through the list to just see who showed up that first year, and it was pathetic. It was like, of 150 people, there were 15 women or something. It was just to the point of, when I came to this realization, I simultaneously was immensely embarrassed and cried. Then that made me more embarrassed. Then I cried some more. But I moved on. We started focusing on this question and saying, like, okay, who would be great? Let's make sure that we actually do it. And at this point, this conference has a lottery, right? Yeah. So there's a lottery because it sells out really quickly. So you have so you apply to the lottery, and then we pick numbers, and if you win, you get to come to the conference. And so I was talking with my partners as we're setting up the lottery for the existing, coming up conference. And I said, okay, so there's the lottery, but any woman who registers is in. They win the lottery. And my partner said, okay, yeah, I mean, I get that, but like when will that not be the case?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know, when it's like 50-50, we can have that conversation, right? Yeah. Like, when will it not be the case? Well, it will not be the case when it's not a bunch of men sitting around a room. That's when it will not be a room. And that's what it should be, right? But it requires that intentionality to get to the right numbers and to say to the people who are like, but David,
yeah,
look at all these men. It's like,
I don't know if you remember this, but so my partner Mike, the first year I was working with him, 2008, goes to this lobby conference, and he comes back and he's like, it was the most amazing thing I've ever been at. You should really try to get into this conference. So I wrote to David, and I was like, hey David, man, Miura-Ko, I'm Mike's partner, would really love to go to the lobby. And David writes back, yeah, would love to have you, but we have too many VCs. And the entrepreneurs... Well,
that was true. In all fairness,
the entrepreneurs complain about the fact that there's too many VCs.
I didn't even know Ann to have a reason to not invite her.
So then I wrote back to him, but this is where I think women need to push, right? And I said, I'm going to use this card, and I don't use it often, but I said, okay, fair enough, David. I'm sure there are lots of people who complain about too many VCs, but how many people are complaining about too many women? And then, and I remember you wrote back, touche, you're in.
And did you attend?
Yeah.
Oh,
like,
yes.
He like sent the invitation, like, right, with this, but like, you gotta point these things out, right? Like, but and David is incredibly supportive of women, so he just like immediately turned that around. But I think like you kind of have to ask. And you can't just be like, oh, okay, he doesn't want VCs. Because, like, I'm not just any VC. I'm, like, a very special VC. And of
That's
course
true in so many ways, Anne. So many ways.
So special.
In my defense, I was new to the Anne magic.
No, it wasn't. I didn't hold anything against, because it was true. There were, like, all these VCs, and who wants a gathering of VCs? I certainly don't want to be there. But
God,
like,
no.
But yeah, you just have to push the envelope, right?
And then, of course, the interesting and appropriate question is, great, okay, so now you've been intentional about making sure that you have better representation of women, but by the way, your representation of people of color is terrible, right? And so now be intentional about that. Now, I'm on the board of an organization called GLAD, which is an LGBTQ advocacy organization, and I was like, so, of course, similarly, I mean, interestingly, while I think that, gay people were certainly underrepresented versus the population, they were better represented than people of color at the lobby, right. Which demonstrates not that I was, trying to get a bunch of LGBTQ folks there. It was that I was being completely unthoughtful about it. And, these were my friends, right? So I think that everything now, because people will then question, right? And we get this. So to your point, like, oh, well, so what? I have to hire, my next partner has to be a woman. Yeah. No, you have to fucking think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I talk to my companies about is when I get this question, okay, we have these two great candidates, but one is clearly way better than the other. The other one, though, serves for this diversity and inclusion thing that we're trying to do. So, like, do we hire the candidate that is like superbly awesome on every dimension for like this role, or do we hire this diversity and inclusion candidate? And I hate that question, right? So, what I always say to them is, okay, but what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for this one single hire where this person may or may not last a year, 2 years, 3 years? Or are you optimizing for your company, for your organization? And like, what are we optimizing for? Because if you start to think about how you're optimizing and what is it that you're trying to maximize, then it flips the question. You're not saying I'm hiring a worse candidate. You're actually hiring the best candidate for the purpose that you're trying to deliver.
But, right? And this is just like college application. So I have 16, 18, 20, 22-year-olds. So I've been college. Yeah, I've been through like three college application processes, and people get all worked up and, oh, the blah candidate got it, whatever. And I just always want to say, like, there is no list of criteria. If someone gave you the criteria, like, oh, here are the things, and if you whatever, then you could make this argument. But it turns out that companies, venture capitalists, colleges are optimizing for amazing. And amazing isn't like, oh, and then I got perfect SAT scores. Right. While that may be one indicia of amazing, it also may be an indicia of not amazing in the context of a bunch of other things. And so often the question is like, okay, so this person is head and shoulders in what regard, right? So I think that the broader conversation is important, and I think that when people are thoughtful about it, then they get to different outcomes. And by the way, you and I have seen that those outcomes get to better long-term outcomes, which is really the point. Like, in the end, by the way, we're venture capitalists, which it makes me deeply sad. I like to think of myself as a venture socialist, but there's this capitalism between me and making money, which I give away. And so I have to do the capitalism part before the socialism part. So we're venture capitalists. Like, people give us money to turn into more money. And so, we should be doing that. It just turns out that there's plenty of evidence that the way to do that is to fund amazing and diverse sets of people. And we've seen it in my own partnership, even though the partnership remains a group of white male GPs, we have a wonderful, lovely principal who's an amazing woman, but in the end, we still get beaten up legitimately for, hey, it's a bunch of white male GPs. But because of the shift in mindset, the number of women entrepreneurs that have been funded by August, as the group of GPs has changed, is dramatic. Mm-hmm. And it turns out then that the number of executives who get hired is dramatic. Women, people of color, LGBTQ, et cetera, Latinx, dramatically different, better outcomes. You get to then see more amazing companies with a more diverse set of founders, et cetera, right? How is that a bad, there's no version of that where you go, well, I don't want that. Like, Mark Zuckerberg's got a penis. I gotta looking for that. Like, that's not the thing. That's just my view.
I had a friend who was telling me about she was in this partnership meeting, and they were evaluating some sort of doctor healthcare startup, and one of the male partners was like, well, obviously women have a longer relationship with their doctors because they start their relationship with their doctors when they start their period. And all the guys in the room were like, oh yeah, uh-huh. And she's like, what? Like, that's your pediatrician? Like, what are you talking about, right? And but if she wasn't in the room, the guys were like, oh yeah, obviously they start their relationship with their doctor when they have their period. And to me, I was like, that is exactly right? Like,
maybe that's when you should start the relationship with your venture capitalist.
Yes.
David, I had my period and I have a great company to pitch. Like, oh, well, good. Welcome. I have to say, I took my daughter. It was like take your kid to work day. I brought my daughter in. She came into the office. I'm like, this is my office. We was being pitched on a business. I said, hey, this is my daughter. We're going to be pitched on the business. She sat in, looking decidedly unpleased. we finish the pitch, we leave, and I think this is like the greatest job in the world. Like, oh my God, the venture business, like, it's such a gift every day that this is what I do for a living. We leave, and here was what my daughter said. You like this job? So perhaps you will not be a venture capitalist. That's fine. There are other jobs for you. Well, okay, it can't be everything. Do you guys have questions? Would you prefer questions or the continued ramblings of insane people? Raise your hand if you prefer.
I see a question.
Oh, we have a question. All right,
there.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for saving the audience from the continued ramblings of insane people.
Oh.
Right in front of you.
All right. Hi, good morning. My name is Bianca. Thank you both for coming. This is great. So on your comments around being okay with being the first at these VC firms, also for context, I have a lot of VC folks, but I think how can those folks hold those companies accountable? Because it sucks being the first. It sucks having to explain to someone, hey, I'm sorry, I have to leave early, or you're being stared at as all right, this is a representative for all things inclusion. So I think, how do we balance that? Yes, you should apply to most of those firms, but quite frankly, I think there's a level of comfort that you're going to get at a all women firm versus the level of comfort of here we go again. They're asking me why I changed my hair again. Or they're oh, that thing about Kanye West. Do you know about that? And it's I don't want to, I think.
Have you met Charles Hudson?
Yes,
Charles Hudson's an amazing guy. Have you met him? Of course I fucking met Charles Hudson. Charles knows everyone. White people, black people, he knows everyone.
No, but yeah, I mean the thing about oh, do you want me to introduce you to this, other black, I was we all know each other, but
we're good.
So I think how do one, what is there, how can that person hold the VC firm accountable in going in going in as the first?
I think that's a great question. But first of all, I'm going to just point out one thing, which is don't let those statements, like, as long as people have good intentions, I don't let that bother me, right? So,
oh no, I mean, sorry to push back. It doesn't bother, but I think after a while, if you're spending all that time kind of like justifying your identity, kind of,
I get it.
It's overhead.
I get it, but like, you would not believe how many people think I'm Aileen Lee, right?
Yeah.
Like, I get so many people saying, I love the Unicorn Report.
Totally, but in all fairness, she's awesome.
She is awesome. So
could be worse. You could be compared to me.
That will never happen.
Sorry.
But I understand like the overhead, right? Because I've been in so many situations where I am the only woman in the room, and people expect me to represent all women, right? Like one of my most memorable first pitches was it was a gaming company, and they were like cooperative games because they were for women, and I was literally the only VC female in the room, and they were suggesting it was for women who watch The View, and so then they're like, I remember all the guys turned to me and they're like, okay, so Anne, like, what do you think of this company? I'm like, I'm fucking here. I'm not watching The View. It is like 10 o'clock in the morning. Like, why are you and I love competitive games. I do not like cooperative games. And
I enjoy The View. What are you saying about The View?
And so while I believe that is, and I know, and I can't say I know to the extent that what you would face. I've seen some of it. What I would say is, in the situations that I've been in where I'm trying to vet whether or not these people are for real and they want me for my unique perspective, which actually happens to include the fact that I am an Asian woman, is I'm trying to see what questions they ask of me. Does it go beyond sort of the veneer of who I am to the deeper level of the things that I know? Are they also really deeply curious about actually having a more diverse perspective and a more diverse deal flow? Are they really interested in the various experiences that I've had? And some partnerships, I will tell you, are not that interested. They want the picture on the website. They want to check that box, and they want to move on. But sometimes I'll ask them, like, well, you're interested in this one hire. What's your next hire going to look like? How do you think about the next 3 hires? How do you think about what will this firm look like in 10 years? Then you'll start to hear the narrative. See if all the partners are on the same page. Because if they're all telling a different story, if they don't include sort of that perspective, then that's a red herring. And the partners who are deeply committed to it, the partnerships that I've seen that are deeply committed to that, will have a consistent narrative around what they're looking for, why they're deeply committed to it, not just for this one partnership role, but for the next generation of partners that they're bringing into the mix.
I think that and to sort of to expand on what Anne's saying, ultimately what you're describing is absolutely the case, right? Every individual who steps into a situation as the first has this burden of explaining to people why their experience is different, their choices are different, etc., or to conform, which is not a great answer by any stretch of the imagination. I think that organizations that are serious, first of all, will be more attuned to the question of creating a comfortable environment, but more importantly, will prioritize making sure that the first is not the only, right? And so I think that the best bet, and look, in the end, if you can join an organization of people who you love, who you think are doing great stuff, where you are not the first, great. We're not saying like you have an obligation to be a pioneer, but in the event that you are a pioneer and you understand that it comes with an added burden, make sure they're serious about it. And it's not like, oh, I'm just going to be, I'm going to hold up this side of the house for everybody, but that you understand that this is about value to the organization, whatever it is, which means that there'll be more of me, right? And I think that organizations that are thoughtful about that are better.
But I have to say, like, I think being a pioneer, though, is never comfortable. And that goes with the territory. And so I applaud all of you who go into a situation where you're the one and the only. And you kind of have to go in with that pioneer mentality of, like, people are going to ask me stupid questions. People are going to make stupid, insensitive comments. And some of it I'll roll with the punches, but others I'll stand up for myself. And so, you know, I applaud you for breaking in, and I think that part of it will be like you have to teach us, right? Like,
I was having a conversation like this with Amy Errett, who's a really wonderful, thoughtful, was a VC at the time, and I said to Amy, you know, when I entered the venture business, there were no men under 6 feet tall, and there certainly were no Jews. And here I am, this teeny little Jewish dude, and you're like a teeny little Jewish lesbian. How's that going for you? And she paused, and she looks at me, and she goes, "So you're a homophobe?" And the room went silent. And then she starts laughing hysterically, she's like, you know, it's hard. Then she said, like, oh yeah, of course. On the one hand, it's being that unique person and the pioneer and whatever else is challenging. But on the other hand, she said it's also an asset, and it's been an asset, and it's been valuable, etc. But you know, so I do think I think that's right. I mean, I think we applaud the folks who are willing to do that. But the way we honor them is by making sure that there are more lesbian venture capitalists, lesbian entrepreneurs. There are more people of color, women of color, you know, in everything.
Yeah, the other thing I would point out is, you know, I was once on a panel where someone pointed out, like, Asian women VCs are kind of like the 6-foot white dude of minorities, and I was like, I'm kind of offended by that in the VC community, but. So there are more of us who are people of color, like women, like Asians are sort of more represented. And I see that. But the thing that I would caution against just saying, okay, then Asians are okay, is when you look at the leadership level, when you look at like the senior vice presidents of most major tech companies, you do not see that many Asian people. And so we can solve the pipeline problem really well, get tons of people of color, lots of women into engineering roles, but there's still something happening within the market that causes certain people to rise up to that executive level and others not to. And you cannot say that there's no pipeline problem for Asians in engineering roles or in a lot of tech companies. And so we still have a lot to solve for, just looking at who rises to that senior leadership level. And so those are things that I'm not just looking at who comes into the market, but who really is promoted. How do we make people ultra successful? So it's not just the associates and the analysts that are in the venture capital firms, but how do we get general partners, managing partners at these firms? And so we have to keep fighting, not just fight for that initial entree, but to make sure that these people are extraordinarily, wildly successful, not just in their titles, but in their returns. And so those are the things that I still think about.
What else? Any over here?
Hi. So we're talking about venture capital, and we're talking about women and people of color being and LGBTQ and being in there, being not just getting in the entry level, but getting on top. And in the end, trying to be comfortable at work when people are not making it okay to be comfortable, to just do your job. That's something that is very hard to answer for how we fight for that. I mean, if the lady, I'm sorry, I don't remember. If you're trying to be okay, and people keep looking at you like you're different, how do we do that? How do we fix that? And it can't be just like, oh, well, I'm going to fight the whole damn time because I've got kids. And it's like,
yeah,
you can't fight the whole damn time. what do we do? How do we do it?
Well, one of the so first of all, it has to come from the top, and so that right,
the white guys at the top,
and the top has been a bunch of oblivious white men historically, which isn't a great answer to the question. I think that that's getting better, and I hope that it gets a lot better. But part of this is a little bit of a marketplace question, which is ideally, and I hope that when the question comes, like, okay, where am I going to work? Am I going to work at this place that has management that seem at best indifferent to this question, or work at a place that has management that seems attuned to the question and are working hard to create an inclusive environment? Let's go there. Now, the byproduct of that is then you have concentration of women, people of color, LGBTQ communities in places, and you have in pockets of places. I think that in the near term, that's probably great, because it means that all these folks who think that they're competing for the best of the best are not legitimately competing, right? They're not getting a whole swath of amazing people, because those people, you're not serious about understanding me and my community and making me, a first-class citizen of your company. And so I think that the companies that understand that and care about it and are serious about it will then be more appealing to a broader set of applicants, and they'll be better, right? So, and I think that will influence executives to take strong positions, right? You look at a Mark Benioff, who has been a very strong advocate across the board, and I think people are more inclined then to be engaged with a sales force than other companies that may not have that. So, I don't know that that's a perfect or immediate fix, and I think that it's a totally fair and it's gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching. But I think that ultimately, if people are thoughtful at the top, and we sit at these board meetings trying to be thoughtful at the top and trying to get companies and executives to be thoughtful, that they'll create environments that then are appealing to everyone, and those will then be the most appealing environments. And I am hopeful, and the very best thing we can do is to make those the biggest, most successful companies, so we can go, duh. And that's, I think, but it doesn't help the near-term hurt, right? And I know that.
Just to add to that, I think actually we need to pull men into this conversation too. And so this is why I love actually having this conversation with David, is that there are men who can take responsibility for this and push the agenda. So as an example, within my firm, I keep getting all of the female founders who want to get advice. I keep getting, when we had our sexual harassment policy, I was asked to construct it. It got sent to me. And what I've started doing is pushing that off to other male partners and getting them involved in it, right? So I say, hey, here's a woman who is really interested in making cloud computing software, Arjun. It's not quite ready for us, prime time, but you should advise her on it, right? Or sexual harassment policy, great. We need to create that. Mike, why don't you come up with a sexual harassment policy? So it's not just us shouldering this burden of all of the things that we need to do to make sure everything's a fair and equitable environment. You need to pull men into the conversation, have them take ownership of it too, and to think about it. And because there are enlightened men around you, there are people who care about these topics, and the more you empower them, the more they are part of that conversation and part of that movement. I actually tweeted out once that I would really love men to actually take on the role of advising more female founders. And you would not believe the number of people who emailed me afterwards and said, if you have any other female founders that I could advise, please send them my way. Because there are people who are willing and wanting to help. But I think, I agree with you. The concept of having to fight for it always on your own, it's a very lonely and trying and exhausting march, right? And it shouldn't just be shouldered on your own.
But Anne, we appreciate that you have taken that march. We appreciate that you are amazing. And thank you all for listening.